Alright guys, Zebulon TV here today, and today I'm going to be talking about, well, not my top 10 favorite albums, I didn't count. I'm just trying to do a quick video here on my favorite albums here. Now I collect vinyl records here, maybe you guys know that, maybe you don't. And I'm just going to show you guys some of my favorites in no particular order, because I just need something to do. I just finished up some homework and I'm going to work on some more homework later on. But I wanted something easy to do, something to help me chill out between then, so I can get into the mood, if you know what I mean. But first here, I have an album that was recorded in Italy by a group of people who worked, no, not worked, but they lived all over Europe. And the guy who formed this band, Brain Ticket, he was a keyboardist from Belgium, and he really loved acid. This is back in the early '70s here, and they recorded their first album, Cottonwood Hill, in Basel, Switzerland. I don't know if I pronounced that right, specifically for the reason that that was the place where acid was first chemically synthesized, LSD, and so that kind of gives you an idea. In that first album, Cottonwood Hill, it sounded like a bad trip. But this here is their second album. It's much more toned out. It's Psychonaut here. There's just something so ethereal about this. I'd say the production is on par with any Pink Floyd album here. Really great singing from a woman named Jane Free, who was British, but some of the other members, they were French, German, Italian, Swiss, really from all over Europe. Just some really, this is like after the psychedelic era. This was the early '70s. The psychedelic era was late '60s. This is not quite progressive rock. I guess it's also not quite krautrock, since they weren't based out of Germany. But it's pretty cosmic, and it's just one of those albums you listen to on headphones. And it kind of puts you in a sort of ethereal mood, I guess. I listen to a lot of progressive rock and psychedelic rock, and you listen to those genres to the point where a lot of it gets kind of boring. And so you have to find something that's even more stranger to kind of scratch that itch, for something interesting and unique. And I've fallen into experimental jazz, avant-garde classical music, and so on. And and I still do listen to progressive rock. And all three of those things, experimental jazz, avant-garde rock, avant-garde classical, and progressive rock. It's Centipede, their album Septober Energy. This is a double album, and their only album. And the reason why they refer to it as Centipede, they call themselves Centipede, because there's about 48 members, 50 of them here, and they have them all listed here in the cover. It was formed by a person named Keith Tippett, and if you're a really big fan of King Crimson, you'd know that Keith Tippett played on 3 King Crimson albums: In the Wake of Poseidon, Lizard, and Islands. And he has a super distinct sound. It just sounds like chaos, like the way he plays the piano. And he got 50 guys together, and they made this album. Members from King Crimson, and also Soft Machine, which is my favorite band. And there's also a whole bunch of other people, just some jazz musicians and some rock musicians from the early '70s here. It's kind of freeform as it starts out, but it gets intense. Well, each of the 4 sides, it's just 4 pieces. They're 20 minutes long. September Energy Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. And each piece starts out kind of slow and freeform, but then it just gets a slow and dramatic build up into something so intense. The kind of intensity that you can't just accomplish with 4 or 5 musicians. This is just it's just so powerful, and it's pretty experimental. And I've read reviews on the internet, people just knocking on this album, which I can kind of get depending on where you're coming from. If you're just a person who likes rock or just like regular jazz, yes. For me, I really do understand this, whether anyone else does. Another thing I really like about the album is the lyrics. There aren't much lyrics, but Keith Tippett's wife, Julie Tippett, wrote the lyrics, and it's not borderline poetry, it is poetry. And yeah, if you like experimental jazz, progressive rock, or avant-garde classical, then definitely give that album a checking out. Another album I have, quite a bit more of a popular than the other two ones, but still arguably underrated, is Smiley Smile by the Beach Boys. Why not Pet Sounds? That's probably a good question here. I do like Pet Sounds. I like it from start to finish. It's a pretty good album, and it took me a while to get into that because the songs are pretty slow. It's got a unique sound to it. It took me a while to get into it. I was able to get into this quite a bit quicker than Pet Sounds, and I really do like it because they were. If you know a lot about the Beach Boys, in 1966 and early '67, they were trying to record what was supposed to be a much better album, better sounding album called Smile, that they weren't able to complete, or I should say that Brian Wilson wasn't really able to complete, and this is what they released in place of it. And I like this album. Maybe it doesn't have kind of like the sonic catharsis that Pet Sounds does, but you can still feel some of the residual pain. It's almost got kind of like not a lo-fi sound. I mean, the sound quality is pretty good because Brian Wilson was messing with it, but it's got kind of a vibe that only a lo-fi album. Well, not only it has a vibe that you dissociate with a lo-fi album. And of course, there's the song "Good Vibrations" on here that sounds great. I believe it's the best-selling single of all time. And there's Heroes and Villains, which is one of my favorite songs in general. And just some... there's also some really good songs on here as well that aren't quite so much as famous, like Wonderful and She's Going Bald. She's Going Bald being a pretty fun sound. It's a pretty fun song, kind of one of the more upbeat songs of the album. And you can look that up on the internet what the song means. It's got a pretty funny meaning to it. One of the things that really makes this album stick out to me is there's a very low organ sound that they use in place of a bass guitar on a large part of the album, and just that low organ sound, it just appeals to me. Really, I really like the sound of it. I have an album here, 666 by Aphrodite's Child. And this is, Aphrodite's Child was a Greek band, but at this time they were based out of France, because there was a lot of political turmoil and an attempted communist revolution in Greece at the time. So a lot of, not just Aphrodite's Child, but a handful of Greek bands were based out of France. For whatever reason, they just based themselves out of France. And the first two Aphrodite's Child albums, they're pretty regular pop music, kind of like some sort of psychedelic, but kind of like down to earth still pop music that I like. Then their third album, they wanted to do not a satanic album, but an album that was supposed to be a musical rendition of the Book of Revelations. Now, if you've ever looked at that part of the Bible, there's some pretty heavy scenery, a sort of biblical horror vibe to it, and they tried their best to encapsulate that onto an album of music, and they did a great job at it. I think this album might be a pretty big turnoff. There's some narration here and there, and some kind of songs that aren't really meant to stand alone. But if you come at this looking for entertainment, it's not so much of an entertainment piece as it is an artistic piece. It's supposed to be a work of art more than a work of entertainment, and it's very powerful. The keyboardist on this album, came up with all these ideas for this album. He was a person named Evangelis Papathanasiou. I'm probably not pronouncing that right because it's a very long Greek name, but he's better known as just Vangelis. Not Evangelis, Vangelis. And he worked with John Anderson from Yes. So if you're a Yes fan, you might have heard of Vangelis. Just maybe. The music on here, I've seen some people label this as a psychedelic rock album, but if you look up 25 best psychedelic rock albums of all time, you'll see the Rolling Stones list, and they include this. And I don't think it's fair to label this as psychedelic rock. I'd say experimental prog rock. That fits the bill for what this album is a lot better. But if you like music, for art as opposed to entertainment, then you might want to check that out. But there also is some really good songs in there, like Babylon and Break, which was released as a single. That kind of charted in different places across Europe, if I'm correct. I have here something from I've had everything from the 70s and 60s so far, but I have an album here from the 90s, Black Foliage Animation Music Volume 1 by the Olivia Tremor Control. And the Olivia Tremor Control was one of those Elephant Six bands that gets associated with Nutri Milk Hotel. A lot of their fame is based off the fame of Nutri Milk Hotel. But as much as I like Nutri Milk Hotel, I don't think anything that Elephant Six had could top this. This kind of has all the elements of a total magnum opus, and I remember when I first tried to listen to this on a bike ride with headphones on, and it was just almost too overstimulating to listen to from start to even get past what would have been the first side of the album. Well, it's a double album, so there's 4 sides, because there's just so much going on in any given moment on the album. Lots of strange sounds and different instruments doing all sorts of different things. It's not like polytonal. I guess like a Captain Beefheart album, Trout Mask Replica, but this it's just so well put together, and it's unfortunately it's a lo-fi album, because they were an indie group, and it really deserves to be a hi-fi album. If you just hear how intricate the compositions are on this album, and there's some really cool paintings here. Well, abstract paintings by Will Cullen Hart, who was also a member of the band here, and even on the record labels here. There's some really great poppy songs like Hideaway and Mystery, and a peculiar noise called Train Director. But there's also some really freeform songs on here as well. There's little bits of music concrete that lasts 5 or 10 seconds, called combinations, that are in between some of the songs, or just kind of like little sound collages. And then there's The Bark and Below It, which is just a 10-minute really long tape collage. It kind of has that similar vibe to Revolution 9 by the Beatles. Now, what I have here is my literal favorite album. It's Third by the Soft Machine. This is, of course, their third album, and the two albums they made before this album were kind of, off-kilter psychedelic rock albums. And, in their second album, you can kind of tell they were kind of like feeling out some jazz. They're trying to feel out jazz, and there's some elements of jazz in their second album, Volume 2. Then their third album was effectively a proper jazz album. It's, again, 4 songs are 20 minutes long, kind of in the same way that Septober Energy is by Centipede. However, this is not so much avant-garde classical and not so much progressive rock, but it's a lot more, jazz-oriented. The first song of the album, Facelift, is just one of my favorite songs. It's 18 minutes of really harsh sounding jazz, and then there's the 2 other songs, Slightly All the Time and Out Bloody Rageous, which are kind of like more leveled out jazz songs that sound a bit smoother, not very smooth, but a bit smoother. And then there's the song Moon and June, which is more or less a progressive rock song. And it's hard for me to describe verbally, because, as far as I'm concerned, the album's effectively perfect. This album, I'd say, it also gets labeled incorrectly as progressive rock, and it's not really fair, because, 75% of the album is just jazz. Not progressive rock, but jazz. There's not really any guitar sounds, but because it was labeled as progressive rock, I had to really force myself to get into it, because I hear people say good things about it on the internet, and I've given it a few re-listens, and just to make sure that I wasn't misunderstanding the music. And the first time I listened to it, I got a headache, because it was just so different from everything I had been listening to. But I'm really glad I stuck with it, because I have yet, I've known about this album for 5 years, and I have yet to hear anything that rivals this. And I have Alexander Spence's Ore, and it's a pretty famous story. If you're really into psychedelic rock. Alexander Spence, he played for a band, Moby Grape, that he co-founded in around 1967, and they made 2 albums before he took so much acid one time that he attempted to kill one of his bandmates, the drummer Don Stevenson, with an axe. And he was institutionalized for about 6 months. And then, while he was institutionalized, he wrote the songs that would appear on this album. And, for the rest of his life, he wasn't really the same, because, he fried his brain with acid, and he continued doing some really hard drugs for the rest of his life. But, and this is the only album he made after he got released from the institution. And the songs in the album, they're demos, so it's kind of hard to not sound pretentious when you say that this is a great album. They weren't meant to be heard by anyone, but the songs in here are still pretty good. It's a bit of a weird album. Well, some of the songs are weirder than others. Some of the songs are pretty normal. Kind of borders on country. Some of it borders on just regular rock, and then some of the songs in the album are just kind of thrown as a joke, like Lawrence of Euphoria and Margaret Tiger Rug. But then the last song of the album, a 12-minute song called Grey Afro, which is just one of the best songs I've ever heard. It's kind of got like a rolling thunder sound of freeform, a freeform drum playing, and how do I even verbally describe the song aside from just having you listen to it? It's really just drums and bass, and they're all kind of playing in a free-form, sort of beat fashion, but they're not really lining up with each other very well. And, Alexander Spence is just kind of mumbling along to the song with some of the really weird lyrics, some of the really weird things that you might imagine in the mind of someone, who had paranoid schizophrenia. There's just something about it that just seems just so, cosmic. And I better stop talking about this album, because it's just evading my words, clearly. I have another album from the 90s, Alien Lanes by Guided by Voices. It's, I guess it's post-punk, I guess, is maybe how you describe it. Just some rock from the 90s here, and there's about 30 songs, and almost 30 songs of the album here. It kind of comes rapid fire. A lot of the songs are, pretty much all the songs are between 30 seconds to 2 minutes, except for a few. There's the really popular song "Game of Pricks," and "My Valuable Hunting Knife." But the whole album, it flows really well because there's this rapid fire changing from one song to the next, because all the songs are so short. And even though there's so many songs and this band is so prolific, they've made, I think, about 30 albums at this point as I'm speaking in 2021. But all the songs of the album, they're interesting, and they add something to the album that would have been missing if they weren't added to the album, and that's pretty impressive when you consider just the output of the band and that they're able to make a solid album. A lot of the songs in here are just really infectious, and I've listened to it over and over again from start to finish so many times, and I still enjoy it every time I listen to it. I also have here an album, "God Bless the Red Crayola and All Who Sail With It" by the Red Crayola. Here, this is from 1968. The Red Crayola, they were a band from Texas, and they're pretty. You can't tell they're from Texas just by listening to their music. They are pretty far out. And in their first album, when they made in 1967, "The Parable of Arable Land," it's pretty safe to say that it's a precursor to noise rock, because they have some psychedelic rock songs, but there's so much noise in the songs and in between them especially that they were able to get just by one day they brought in 50 people into the studio who they played for in a club the night before, and they just had all 50 of these people just making all sorts of noise to add depth to the album. In this album, it's almost like a polar opposite, because I don't want to say empty, because when I say empty it sounds like an insult, but really for the most part it's just bass and drums and singing, and as far as the guitar parts go, there's not really a whole lot of guitar chords even being played. They're just picking individual notes, so it has kind of like this empty sound, but it also sounds really playful. It sounds like they just wrote the album in a day and they recorded it the next day. It's very fun to listen to. It doesn't really have any grandiosity, I'd say, like a lot of the other albums I have here. It's just a fun album. There's some kind of silly songs in here, like Sherlock Holmes and music, and then there's some kind of songs that kind of have like a very like a borderline apocalyptic vibe, like The Shirt and Ravi Shankar Parachutist and the Green of My Pants, as well as some borderline regular songs like Victory Garden and The Jewels of the Madonna. It sounds too lazy for a lot of people to take seriously. But if you're not trying to, if you're the kind of person you can listen to music that you don't necessarily take seriously, then I guess maybe you might be able to come around to the album. But it's a hard one to get into. If unless you've been listening to really experimental music for a while. I have here the Rolling Stones, their Satanic Majesty's Request. Now I tend not to like the Rolling Stones because I just don't like bluesy music. So a lot of their albums fall flat with me. However, this is their psychedelic rock album, and I really like it. Obviously, the album cover is pretty cool. You can see it's got a holographic cover. Depending on what angle you're looking at it, it's a different image. If you hold it like this, the members are looking at you, and if you hold it like an angle, the members are looking at each other. Here, and they were the first band to do that. Not that there have been many bands since then who've done that, but they really went above and beyond the cover, and it's one of my favorite album covers, on top of being one of my favorite albums. And what I have here is I have it's sort of a box set, but not really a box, of the album. What comes with the album, it's the mono and stereo versions of the album here. And I paid about $80 for this, so I'm not extremely happy with the album. Well, not with the album, well, with the choice to package the stereo and the mono version together, because the stereo and the mono version, they're not very different with each other. Sometimes the stereo and mono versions of albums can be pretty different, and one can be really better than the other, or both could be pretty good, or but in this case they're not very different from each other, and both the mixes are not particularly good. And I guess that's like my only beef with the album, is that the if you pay attention to the sound quality of things, or if you look at if you really know what it means for an album to be mixed well, then there's some issues with the album. For example, on the Lantern, the stereo version, there's bells chiming in that come in for like the first 30 seconds or so, and it's all panned to one side. You can only hear it out of one speaker, and that's really annoying to listen to with headphones on. On the other hand, on that same song, The Lantern, they have a brass band playing on the stereo version that for some reason is not on the mono version. And another issue with the mono version is that on the song Citadel, another one of my favorite songs, the mix just sounds cluttered. And you want it to be a very clear song, but it's just when you listen to it in mono, it's not quite as full sounding as the stereo version. I have here, I guess my second favorite album, Begin by the Millennium. This is a psychedelic rock album, but very, very, level-headed as well. Down to Earth. This was released in 1968, and it's up there, I'd say, with the Beach Boys and the Beatles, even though they spent so much money producing this album, and hardly anyone bought it. And now it's a pretty rare album, and I have this reissue here. And there's just some really great soft psychedelic pop music on here. I like a lot of the Sunshine Pop from the 60s, but one of the really negative things I can say about Sunshine Pop is, is a subgenre is that a lot of the lyrics are just kind of like really stupid and childish and, you know, nonsensical. However, you know, on this album, the lyrics, you get the feeling that, you know, it's about something greater, you know, than just, you know, lovey-wovey nonsense. It's kind of hard to describe. You know, it's pretty cosmic stuff. Uh, some of the songs are borderline poetry, I would say. You know, it's got good lyrics, and that's one of the really great things about the album. Especially good lyrics for a sunshine pop album. And the last album I have here, not my least favorite out of them, it's just the last one I have here, is King Crimson's Lizard. This is their third album. Now, you know, most people who like King Crimson, they like In the Core of the Crimson King, which is their very first album. And for a good reason, too. It's a solid album. It was a precursor to a lot of the progressive rock that existed in the 70s, and a lot of that progressive rock existed because of them, as well as bands like Yes and, you know, Emerson, Lake and Palmer even. But this album, above all, I like music that's unique and chaotic sounding, and this album is both unique and chaotic sounding. You know, Keith Tippett, like I mentioned earlier, he played on this album, and then you get this distinctive keyboard playing style, which is just, you know, kind of freeform chaos. But also, you get a person named Gordon Haskell, who is the singer and bassist on this album. When I first listened to this album, I really hated the singing because of how deep Gordon Haskell's voice is. But if you can, you know, learn to appreciate it, it's really rewarding, because the music on this album is like nothing I've ever heard before. Again, excellent lyrics too. They had Peter Sinfield writing all the lyrics for the band at this point, and for the two albums before and the album after this. And for this album especially, the lyrics are just nonsense poetry. Well, not like total nonsense, but very, very weird poetry. But it has a certain, you know, intensity to it that you learn to appreciate. I guess one of the really cool things is the album's cover. You can look. It's one of those album covers that you can look at all day. But if you look at the eye here, you can see that the Beatles. You can see the Beatles drawn here on the cover. And this relates to the third song of the album is Happy Family, which is again weird lyrics, but if you pay close attention, you just might realize that the song is alluding to the Beatles' breakup, which had just happened at the time that the album was being recorded. So it's a song about them. Then there's the 20-minute song Lizard, the title track that comes at the end of the album, with John Anderson from Yes singing on it. He did a very great job. And then there's a sort of bolero connecting that first part of the song to a really intense ending that's very worth listening to. Thank you guys for watching, and have a good rest of your day.